The story is titled, Buried Under the Trash, the terrifying 4-hour ride that led to freedom. It wasn't the bars that broke you first at Green River Correctional. It was the smell. It hung over the yard like a wet wool blanket, a mixture of industrial bleach, sour cafeteria slop, and the underlying metallic tang of 2,000 men sweating out their fear in close quarters. I remember stepping off the transport bus, the shackles cutting into my ankles, and gagging on that air. It tasted like a dead end. I am Elias Thorne, 34, male, and up until that moment, I'd convinced myself that the trial was a mistake, a bad dream I'd wake up from in my own bed. But when the intake officer shoved me against the cold concrete wall and told me to spread my cheeks, the dream died. I was doing 20 years for aggravated robbery and accessory to manslaughter. I didn't pull the trigger. I was just the driver, the guy who needed $5,000 to pay off a gambling debt. But the law doesn't care about the guy behind the wheel when a security guard bleeds out on the pavement. You take the ride, you pay the toll. Orientation was a blur of noise and intimidation. They strip you of your name, your clothes, and your dignity in under an hour. You become a number. You become meat. I was marched into C Block, a towering cage of steel and echoing screams. The acoustics in a prison are designed to keep you on edge. You hear everything. A cough 3 cells down sounds like a gunshot. A whisper travels through the vents like a curse. My cell was a 6x8 concrete box that smelled of mildew and old urine. My cellmate was already on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Marcus Old Man Freeman, 62, male, didn't even look at me when I dragged my mattress in. He just pointed a scarred finger at the top bunk. "That's you," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. "Don't snore, don't talk about your case, and don't ask me about mine. We clear?" We were clear. I climbed up, staring at the ceiling inches from my nose. The graffiti scratched into the paint told 100 different stories of misery. God left this place. Die slow. Mama, I'm sorry. I traced the letters with my thumb, the reality settling in my gut like swallowed lead. I was going to be an old man before I saw the sky without a fence cutting through it. The first week is where most guys crack. You're waiting for the appeal that isn't coming. You're jumping at shadows. I tried to keep my head down, but in Green River, invisibility is a luxury you have to buy. I didn't have money, and I didn't have friends. That made me a target. It started small, a shoulder check in the chow line, a missing bar of soap. But the violence was in the air, static electricity waiting for a spark. I got assigned to work detail on day 4. They put the new fish on the worst jobs to test them, see if they'll break. I got waste management. It sounded official, but it meant I was sorting trash in the loading dock, knee-deep in the filth of the entire prison. That's where I met him. Officer Mitchell, 45, male. He was the CO in charge of the dock, a man with a thick neck and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and enjoyed too little. He watched us sort through the slop, wet cardboard, rotting food, contraband, with a boredom that terrified me. He didn't scream like the other guards. He just watched, waiting for a mistake. "You think you're better than this, Thorne?" Mitchell asked me on my second shift, tapping his baton against his leg. I was retching, trying to shovel a pile of wet, molded bread into the compactor. "No, sir," I mumbled, sweat stinging my eyes. "Good," he said, stepping closer, invading my space until I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Because you're not. You're trash, just like what you're shoveling, and trash goes in the pit." He kicked the bucket I was holding, sending sludge over my boots. I froze. My fists clenched. I wanted to swing. I wanted to smash his teeth in. But I saw the look in his eyes. He was begging me to do it. He wanted a reason to send me to the hole. Or worse. I unclenched my hands, lowered my head, and kept shoveling. That was the first lesson. Pride is the first thing you have to kill if you want to survive. But as I shoveled, watching the massive rust-colored compactor groan and crush the life out of the refuse, a dark, terrifying thought planted itself in the back of my mind. The truck. The massive sanitation hauler that came twice a week to take the compacted blocks away. It was the only thing that entered the gates and left without a full inspection, just a cursory glance at the paperwork. I looked at the compactor. I looked at the crushing hydraulic plate. It was a death trap, a suicide run. But standing there, covered in filth, with Mitchell's laughter echoing off the loading dock walls, I realized something. I was already buried. I was already dead. The only difference was that inside that truck, there might be a way to claw back to the surface. It was a faint, insane flicker of hope. But in the dark of Green River, even a flicker looks like a lighthouse. Time in Green River didn't move in hours or minutes. It moved in shifts, counts, and caloric intake. You stopped looking at the calendar because the dates didn't matter. Only the routine did. Wake up at 5 odd a.m. to the sound of batons rattling against the bars. Count at 5:30. Chow at 6 baos. Lukewarm grits that tasted like drywall paste. Work detail at 7 baos. I settled into the rhythm of the trash dock like a rat learning a maze. For 6 months, I kept my head down, my mouth shut, and my eyes open. I became a ghost in a jumpsuit, invisible to everyone except Officer Mitchell. He had made it his personal hobby to break me. Some days he'd kick over a bin I'd just sorted. Other days, he'd lose my chow ticket, forcing me to work on an empty stomach until my hands shook so bad I dropped refuse on the floor, giving him an excuse to write me up. But the abuse sharpened me. It stripped away the fear of punishment and left only a cold, calculating hatred. And through that hatred, I began to see the patterns. The sanitation truck, a hulking white beast with waste-away services stenciled on the side, arrived every Tuesday and Friday at 10:45 a.m. The driver, a heavyset guy named Carl, I caught his name from a clipboard, never got out. He stayed in the cab, radio blasting, eating a sandwich while the compactor ram pushed the compressed blocks of trash into the rear loader. The plan wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a slow accumulation of details, like silt building up in a riverbed. I watched the compactor. It was an industrial crusher, a steel jaw that exerted 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. It could turn a refrigerator into a metal pancake. But I noticed something. When the hydraulic ram extended to push the trash into the truck, it didn't go flush against the back wall of the container. There was a gap, maybe 14 inches of dead space behind the ram's fully extended arm, a pocket of air where the mechanism reset. 14 inches. That was the difference between life and being a smear of red paste on a landfill site. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November. It was freezing, the kind of wet cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. The compactor jammed. A bundle of wet magazines and plastic sheeting had wedged itself into the tracks of the hydraulic arm. The machine groaned and seized, the motor whining in protest. Mitchell stormed over, his breath steaming in the air. He looked at the machine, then at me. "Thorne, get inside and clear it." I looked at him, thinking he was joking. "Sir, you have to cut the power first. The lockout tag." "I'm not walking all the way to the control booth for a stuck magazine," Mitchell snapped, his hand resting on his baton. "The cycle is paused. Get in there, clear the track, and get out. Unless you want to spend the next month in the hole." I looked at the black maw of the compactor. It smelled of rotting meat and sour milk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If the hydraulics slipped, if Mitchell sneezed and hit the button, I was dead. I climbed in. The darkness swallowed me. The floor was slick with slime. I crawled over bags of refuse, the air thick enough to chew. I found the jam. The magazines were wedged tight. I yanked at them, my boots slipping on the metal floor. I was hyper-aware of the steel plate looming inches from my head. It felt like being inside the chamber of a gun. I ripped the debris free. "Clear," I shouted, my voice trembling. "Move it," Mitchell yelled back. But I didn't move immediately. I scrambled to the back, to that dead space I'd theorized about. I pressed my back against the cold steel of the container wall and pulled my knees to my chest. I fit. Barely. My spine ground against the metal. My knees scrapped the hydraulic arm housing. It was tight, suffocating, and terrifying. "Thorne!" Mitchell screamed. I scrambled out, tumbling onto the concrete dock just as Mitchell slammed his hand on the resume button. The machine roared to life. The ram slammed forward with a bone-shaking thud, passing right through the space where I had just been curled up. I lay on the concrete, gasping, covered in muck. Mitchell laughed, a dry, soulless sound. "Look at you, scared of a little machinery." That night, back in the cell, I couldn't stop shivering. The adrenaline crash left me hollow. Marcus Old Man Freeman was sitting on his bunk, whittling a piece of soap with a sharpened spoon handle. He hadn't said 5 words to me in weeks, but tonight, he stopped whittling. "You smell like death, kid," Freeman rumbled, not looking up. "Compactor jammed," I whispered, staring at the graffiti on the ceiling. "And you went inside." It wasn't a question. He turned the soap over in his calloused hands. "I've seen men look at that truck before. They look at it like it's a taxi cab." I froze. I slowly sat up and looked at him. Freeman's eyes were cloudy but sharp. He saw everything. "Mitchell nearly killed me today," I said, the confession spilling out. "He didn't care." "They never care," Freeman said softly. "To them, we're inventory, damaged goods." He paused, meeting my gaze. "The driver, Carl? He takes a smoke break at the turnaround point 3 miles down the road. He stops for exactly 4 minutes to check the hydraulics. He doesn't check inside." My breath caught in my throat. Freeman wasn't just making conversation. He was giving me the map. "Why tell me?" I asked. Freeman went back to his soap. "Because I'm too old to run, and I'm too tired to care if the count is short 1 number in the morning. But listen to me, Thorne. That truck crushes everything. If you don't time that cycle right, if you panic..." He sliced a chunk of soap off, the flake falling to the floor like snow. "You won't just die. You'll vanish." That was the moment. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It hardened into resolve. I wasn't just a prisoner anymore. I was an engineer of my own resurrection. The truck was coming Friday. I had 3 days to prepare to die, or 3 days to prepare to live. I lay back down, closing my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, I didn't see the bars. I saw the dark wet inside of that machine, and I started counting seconds. 1, 2, 3. Wednesday and Thursday were the longest years of my life. Fear has a taste, like chewing on aluminum foil, and I couldn't spit it out. I went through the motions of the routine, but my mind was already dismantling the logic of survival. I wasn't hoarding food anymore. I was hoarding protection. I spent 2 nights tearing pages out of the magazines Freeman kept under his mattress. Thick bundles of National Geographic and Reader's Digest. I folded them into pads, slipping them under my jumpsuit, taping them to my ribs and kidneys with strips of duct tape I'd bartered 3 packs of soups for in the yard. It was makeshift armor. Against a hydraulic ram delivering tons of force, it was paper. But it was the only psychological shield I had. Freeman watched me from his bunk, his eyes reflecting the dim corridor lights. He didn't offer luck. In here, luck was a fairy tale. Instead, he offered a single, terrifying piece of advice on Thursday night. "When the ram hits," he whispered, the darkness of the cell making his voice sound disembodied. "Don't hold your breath. If your lungs are full when the pressure comes, they'll pop like balloons. Exhale. Scream it out if you have to, but empty yourself." Friday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The air on the loading dock was frigid, the kind of cold that makes the smell of rot sharper, more distinct. The Waste-Away Services truck rumbled through the gates at 10:48 a.m., 3 minutes late. I felt every second of that delay in my teeth. Mitchell was in a foul mood. He paced the concrete platform, his boots splashing in puddles of trash juice. He was screaming at a new transfer, a kid named Ruiz, for dropping a pallet. This was my window. The chaos of Mitchell's cruelty was the only cover I'd get. Carl, the driver, backed the massive white truck up to the compactor chute. The reverse beeping was deafening, a rhythmic countdown to the end of my life. Beep, beep, beep. "Thorne, hook it up," Mitchell barked, not looking at me, his attention still fixed on humiliating Ruiz. I moved. My legs felt like wood. I grabbed the heavy safety chains that locked the compactor to the truck's rear loader. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely thread the hooks. I signaled to Carl. He gave a thumbs up from the cab and engaged the truck's internal compactor, opening the rear bay to accept the load. This was it. The loading cycle takes 90 seconds. The compactor on the dock pushes the trash block into the truck. Then the truck's internal blade sweeps it back. I waited for Mitchell to turn back to Ruiz. He did, shoving the kid against the wall. I didn't think. Thought is the enemy of action. I vaulted over the side of the open hopper. I landed waist-deep in a slurry of cold coffee grounds, slimy plastic, and jagged metal cans. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Ammonia and rot so potent my eyes instantly watered. I scrambled toward the back, toward the throat of the machine, aiming for the 14-inch gap behind the ram plate. I curled into the fetal position, my back pressed against the cold steel housing, my knees pulled into my chest. I was wedged between a wall of steel and a wall of garbage. Then, the noise changed. The compactor motor whined to a higher pitch. The light from the dock opening began to shrink. The ram started to move. It wasn't fast, but it was relentless. The steel plate pushed the trash toward me. The garbage compressed, shifting and groaning. A plastic crate shattered somewhere near my head, sending shards flying. The pressure built instantly. The magazines taped to my ribs dug into my skin. Exhale. Freeman's voice screamed in my head. I blew all the air out of my lungs just as the trash wall slammed into me. The pain was absolute. It felt like being crushed in a giant hand. My ribs groaned under the torque. The world went black, then red. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was just a piece of debris being forced through a steel tube. The sheer mechanical power was terrifying, indifferent, cold, massive. Then, a lurch, a drop. I fell. Gravity took over as the load was pushed out of the dock compactor and into the belly of the truck. I tumbled down a slope of slick garbage, landing hard on something metallic in the pitch blackness. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted of sulfur and dead things. I was in. I was inside the truck. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was just starting. From the outside, I heard the muffled clank of the locking clamps releasing. The truck's engine revved, a deep, vibrating rumble that shook the floor beneath me. Then, a new sound, a hydraulic hiss from inside the truck. The truck's internal sweeper blade. It was coming to pack the load tight against the front of the container to make room for more. Panic, cold and electric, surged through me. I scrambled in the dark, my hands slipping on wet bags, trying to find the front wall, trying to get away from the rear door where the blade would start its sweep. I crawled over a mountain of filth, cutting my hand on a rusted tin lid. I didn't feel the cut. I only felt the vibration of the blade engaging. The truck lurched forward. We were moving. I wedged myself into the corner near the cab wall, burying myself under layers of shredded paper and cardboard, praying the driver wouldn't compact the load while driving. The motion of the truck was violent. Every pothole, every turn threw me against the steel walls. I was buried alive in a rolling coffin, surrounded by the refuse of 2,000 criminals. The darkness was total. The noise was a deafening roar of engine and rattling steel. And as the truck picked up speed, hitting the highway, The reality settled in. I wasn't Elias Thorne anymore. I was trash, and I had 3 miles, 4 minutes, to figure out how to keep from being buried in a landfill forever. The road was a series of violent concussions. Inside the belly of the waste-away truck, there was no suspension, only the unforgiving steel floor bouncing against the highway. I was buried under wet cardboard and bags of cafeteria slop, the darkness total, the smell of physical weight pressing against my bruised ribs. Every time the truck hit a pothole, I was thrown against the wall, my body screaming, the magazines taped to my torso slipping with sweat. I didn't know how much time had passed. In the dark, minutes stretch into hours. I just counted the vibrations, praying the internal sweeper blade wouldn't engage again. If Carl decided to compact the load while driving, a common habit for lazy drivers trying to make room, I would be crushed into a block of biological waste before we even reached the turnaround. Then the pitch of the engine changed. The roar dropped to a rumble. The hiss of air brakes cut through the noise like a scythe. We were slowing down. Freeman's voice echoed in my memory. 3 miles. 4 minutes. The truck lurched to a halt. The parking brake engaged with a pneumatic thump. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. I heard the cab door open, then slam shut. Heavy boots crunched on gravel. This was it. I scrambled upward. The trash was slick, shifting like quicksand under my boots. I clawed at plastic bags that tore open, spilling rot onto my face. I needed to reach the top of the pile, near the rear hopper opening where the light filtered in. A thin gray line of freedom. My left hand found purchase on a jagged piece of metal casing. I pulled, my shoulders screaming in protest. I dragged myself up the mountain of filth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear Carl whistling outside, a casual, mindless tune. He was checking the hydraulic lines on the driver's side. I reached the lip of the rear opening. The cold air hit my face, shocking and clean compared to the miasma inside. I peered over the edge. We were parked on a gravel shoulder bordered by dense, leafless woods. Carl was out of sight, but I could hear the clink-clink of him tapping pressure gauges. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over the side. My landing was ugly. I hit the gravel hard, my knees buckling, rolling instinctively to absorb the impact. The sharp stones tore through my jumpsuit, shredding the skin on my palms. I lay there for a split second, exposed, a creature of filth in the open world. "What the hell?" The voice came from the front of the truck. The whistling had stopped. I didn't look back. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the agony in my ribs, and sprinted for the tree line. "Hey, hey!" Carl shouted. I heard the heavy crunch of his boots giving chase, but he was slow, and I was running on pure, terrified adrenaline. I crashed into the underbrush, thorns tearing at my face. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until the sound of the truck faded into the hum of the distant highway, until my legs gave out and I collapsed into a ditch filled with dead leaves and ice water. I lay there for a long time, shivering violently. The silence of the woods was terrifying. In prison, there is never silence. There is always a hum, a yell, a clank. Here, the silence was vast and indifferent. I looked at my hands. They were covered in black grime and dried blood. I smelled like the inside of a grave. I stripped off the jumpsuit, peeling the duct tape and sodden magazines from my skin. The cold air bit into my naked torso, but I needed to get the prison off me. I found the bundle of civilian clothes Freeman had helped me steal from the laundry intake. A pair of oversized jeans and a flannel shirt, wrapped tight in plastic bags I'd shoved down my pant leg. I dressed in the freezing ditch. The clothes were stiff and cold, but they didn't have a number on them. The walk that followed was a blur of paranoia. I avoided the roads, sticking to the tree line, moving only when the cloud cover was thickest. Every snapping twig sounded like a racking shotgun. Every distant car engine sounded like a patrol unit. I made it to a gas station bathroom 6 miles away, entering through the back, keeping my head down. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. My eyes were hollow, sunken deep into a skull that looked too sharp. There was a cut across my forehead I didn't remember getting. I washed the grime from my face with trembling hands. The water turned black in the sink. I was out. I was free. But as I stood there, listening to the hum of the vending machine outside, I realized the lie. I wasn't free. I was just outside. I thought of Mitchell, pacing the dock. I thought of Freeman, sitting on his bunk, whittling soap, waiting to die in a cage. I had escaped the walls, but I hadn't escaped the sentence. I would never sleep soundly again. I would never see a police car without flinching. I would never smell garbage without tasting bile. I stepped out of the bathroom into the cold night air. The sky was huge, an endless, crushing expanse of black. It didn't feel like possibility. It felt like exposure. I pulled the collar of the flannel shirt up, turned my back on the light, and started walking. I had $20, a stolen identity, and a lifetime of looking over my shoulder. The escape was over. The run had just begun.